Welcome to this webcast with customer success leaders from Notion and Wisq. We are excited to bring you digital-led human engagement, creating customer success programs that scale. But first, let me introduce myself. My name is Dickie Singh, and I'm the founder and CEO of Cast.app. Cast is an automation platform to help customer success and revenue teams scale growth and revenue from existing customers without expanding teams. With Cast, you use an automated bot, a virtual CSM, to share and explain customer insights to all personas and tie them to actionable recommendations and practical advice at scale. Today, we welcome industry experts and operators, Monica Perez, who leads customer success at Notion, and Celia G, who leads customer success at Wisq. Let me hand the mic to Monica and Celia to introduce themselves and their company. Celia?
Hi, everyone. I'm Celia Gouveia. I've been in the customer success space for about 15 years. I've been building startups from the ground up, growing, scaling teams, and also been on the CS operations front. I've been at companies like Glint in employee engagement, which was acquired by LinkedIn, or SuccessFactors and SAP. I'm currently at a startup called Wisq, where we are focused on creating a space for life at work and focusing on connection and belonging. My personal life, I have 2 kids under 5, which keep me busy. And when not taking care of them, I'm also a huge fan of my Peloton. And over to you, Monica.
Nice. Thanks, Celia. Hi, everyone. My name is Monica Perez. I head up customer success here at Notion. I've built customer success teams across companies of all sizes, from sub $1 million kind of SMB-oriented companies all the way up to enterprise-focused companies upwards of 100 million ARR. So today I'm at Notion. We are an all-in-one workplace tool for your company's knowledge base, project management, task management, and the list goes on and on if you've heard about Notion. In my personal life, I wish I could say that I spent time on my Peloton, but probably not as much as Celia. But one thing about me is that I'm trilingual, so I speak English, Spanish, and Portuguese.
Thank you so much. So when we talked about what scaling meant to different people, very quickly, I realized both of you had so much to talk about that subject. So let's just jump right in. So let's start with Monica.
Yeah, so for any good presentation, we learned this in college, you should start with a working definition. And so what we did was we actually surveyed some experts in the field in customer success to ask, what term do you use for scale? What are you referring to when you talk about scaling your CS offering, creating programs at scale? What does that mean? And so these were all the responses. We can see it's kind of all over the map, but a lot of the terms we're hearing in the industry, that's kind of a hot topic today. So things like one-to-many, tech touch, digital programs, land and expand. And so for today's talk, when we're talking about scaling customer success, we're really talking about scaling the way in which you deliver your outcomes and you deliver your engagement model to customers. And this can take many forms as listed here. And so we're really going to get into it. It's not so much scaling your org in terms of headcount, but it's more about scaling how you service more and more customers over time.
Thank you.
Yeah, and regardless of what you call it, we'll be calling it scaling for the purpose of this presentation. And so what does scaling even mean? We like to think of it as understanding what your customers' goals and needs are based on what do they need to accomplish by which timeline, and how do you deliver that in the most efficient way possible. I really like to focus on success metrics when we're talking about scaling. So focusing on how are your customers using the product? How are they adopting it? What are the outcomes that they're desiring? And what leads to retention and renewal? And finally, how do you automate those processes? Through both proactive and reactive playbooks, so you can have consistent delivery based on where the customer is, meeting them where they are, and leading them to the next step throughout your journey, which we'll talk about in just a moment.
I love this image. It's very cute. Yeah, so I think for those of you out there that are CS leaders, we're always trying to figure out how can we make what we do more efficient? How can we drive more impact while not necessarily sacrificing on the tried and true things that we've done today? So a big question that comes up is, okay, I have lots of customers, the number of customers that we have is growing, our tactics are getting better, our learnings are stronger than ever. So when is it time to kind of scale up our efforts and what we do? Maybe you're getting some pressure from your CEO or from leadership to really think about how can you scale CS over time. And we like to say, don't worry, don't try to get in over your head too much at once. But this really is a crawl, walk, run kind of process. The first thing that you can do to figure out what is scalable is really listening in and learning. Do you truly know what is making your customers successful? Can you point to the top 1, 2, 3 things that if they happen in your product, you know that your customer will experience value and is tied to, let's say, retention and growth over time. So spend a lot of time listening and learning and kind of documenting those top 2 or 3 trends that you're seeing. Once you have a good learning tour going on, the next thing you want to do is map out the journey that your customer goes on. You've probably seen this journey now a number of times, and it can take the form of a product adoption journey and what that looks like, as well as a maturity journey, how much they mature in your product over time. And so as you start laying out that customer journey, you're able to kind of find trends and create kind of buckets or phases within that journey. And once you've identified the stages, you pretty much at this point have an idea of the right type of customer success engagement that you want to drive at any one of these stages. So mapping that out as well. So now that we have a sense of what makes our customers successful, what is the journey that they're going on and the desired engagement at any phase of that journey, now we can start scaling. And I highly recommend you start with one thing at a time. Try one process that you want to automate or semi-automate, see how that goes, test and iterate over time. And then you'll find that you're able to, once you do it once, it probably takes a lot more effort, and then you could do it the second time or the third time much faster. So take the kind of mapping exercise and then figure out what processes from those can be automated first. Okay, so now that we've decided that we need to scale, we understand when it could be a good time to scale, we want to dive a little bit deeper and kind of highlight the important elements that you should really understand about your growing customer base as you think about providing more programmatic or scaled engagements to these customers. So we can look at 3 major dimensions of your customer base. The first one is segmentation, and we'll talk a little bit about different ways to do segmentation. The second one is customer maturity. How mature are they with your product, and how does that evolve over time? And then we're also going to talk about customer journeys. How does a buyer journey look different from the customer journey, and how does this inform what customer success teams are doing? So let's start at a high level with the buyer and customer journey. So we know that from a sales cycle to the CS world, the buyer journey can have some overlap, but tends to be quite different from our customer journey. And CS can play a role in all of that. As we can see from this image here, the sales funnel is much broader and is much more oriented on the buyer's experience. And part of that journey, I would say the very end of the buyer experience, is something called pre-boarding, where you're prepping the customer to go through onboarding, but really identifying those success elements early and onwards with the right points of contact, so that onboarding is very straightforward. We're seeing a world where customer success is actually getting involved in pre-boarding the customer, helping them understand what the customer success program is bringing to them, and helping them get peace of mind in how successful we hope to make their onboarding experience. So there's a little bit of overlap in that pre-boarding, and I've seen really good examples of strong partnerships between sales teams and customer success teams, maybe even bringing in the CSM a little bit early before the deal closes to start that relationship early and onwards. And then finally, when the customer journey begins, that's when the CS work tends to begin as well. And so we take them through the typical stages that you've probably seen before in this flywheel, things like onboarding, activation, adoption, growth, and expansion.
Great. So thanks so much, Monica, for setting the stage. I'd love to dive deeper into 2 topics that are really near and dear to my heart: customer maturity and segmentation. So let's first set the stage on segmentation. I like to think of segmentation as when you're dividing your customer base based on specific factors that are important both for you as a company and for your customer, so that these customers are divided into similar cohorts and you can better deliver against what makes them successful. And again, what makes them successful would be success metrics that you set, such as things like usage, adoption, retention, and so on. So some of the models we'll cover are the ways to get started, but you really want to iterate and advance over time. So one of the things that I like to start with is ARR based, or annual recurring revenue. This is when you look at your customer base and you see how much they're spending overall. And this is the first way most companies typically segment their customers into different cohorts. Typically, the next part is to segment based off of how much are they spending and how much is their future potential? How much could they grow over time, both based off of their business or their use cases within our product and ability to use additional products or features in the future. What many people don't talk about, which I think is so critical, is the other areas to layer on. So as you start to look at your customer base, there may be 2 customers that have the exact same spend with you, but they're at different stages on the customer maturity model. What does that mean? That could mean that maybe one customer has a much longer tenure or a more experienced person, or they are experiencing a different growth pattern, a different desired outcome. And so you may want to treat them differently. Maybe they need more hands-on support for an objective that's coming up. They're based on a certain timeline. Whereas that same customer has different needs as the customer who spends the same exact amount, but is completely self-sufficient. They don't need to talk to you as much. They maybe just want to check in every now and then. They have some goals they want to achieve, but they're also achieving them already. And so you really want to look at not only spend, but layer on top, where is the customer? What goals are they trying to achieve? What goals do we want them to achieve on the journey? And how do we get there together? Other areas I like to layer on, and which also help with your journey mapping as you move forward, are things like industry. There's different industries that require different types of services at different times. It may be the buyer or the customer persona that you're working with. For instance, if you're working with a CEO versus someone in IT, they may have different needs and different frequency of needs at times. Or it could be the tenure of the customer. You know, the first year or the first even months of a contract with a customer, you may be focusing on something very different than you are in year 2 and 3. And then finally, another one I like to think of is outcome and goal. So what is the customer looking to achieve? What's their desired outcome? And what's the desired outcome we would like to deliver to get them there? And how do we do that together? So what we're going to talk about is the first 2 models, but equally as important to consider starting simple, start your segmentation, get your cohorts of customers together in understanding what makes them similar to each other, but continue to layer on the other areas that you find important to your business to be able to make your customers successful. So with that said, we'll talk high level about the first model. So this is that basic one I was mentioning. This is typically the easiest way to start. Doesn't matter what type of company you are, there's typically different spend by customers. And these are just samples of what some may look at as different spends or different ratios. These are not set in stone, and you'll know based on trying in your business and learning from your customers, as we talked about earlier, what's best for them. But typically you see starting from the top, you may hear of this as your enterprise or your high touch customers, the customers that are spending the most, that typically need the most at that time, if you were to layer on some of the other models on top of this. Then you start to get to mid-tier customers, or as some may call them, low touch, all the way down to customers that are spending the least. And hopefully you can do some tech touch with them, but also some tech touch across all of your customer base. So that would mean that you're automating processes, you're automating some of the deliverables, and you're creating a really personalized experience, regardless of what the customer's spending. But for customers who are spending more and need more on the maturity model, you're also flexible enough to be able to deliver that by potentially having a CSM have a smaller customer base so they can spend more time to ensure that those customers are seeing value. We'll go into our next model.
Happy to take that. So this is maybe a little bit more of a sophisticated model. And this is taking what Celia teed up, but making it a little bit more nuanced. And so we actually have a model that includes 2 dimensions when we're trying to segment our customers. One is ARR, current ARR, and the x-axis, as you can see here, is future potential ARR. This is a dimension that the business cares about. And so therefore, we actually want to understand where our customers are today, but also where they can go in the future. Maybe for your organization, there's another dimension that's important. Maybe you want to do ARR versus product maturity. There's different ways that you can slice this, but it really helps us bucket our customers, not just by one single blanket rule like ARR, but it allows you to add another layer of complexity there so that you can really get fine-tuned on what are the right types of engagements you want to have. In this example, we have current ARR by future potential ARR. And so in the bottom left quadrant, this could be our lowest ARR customers with the lowest potential. We would call this the low bucket. And in this case, you can see that the recommended approach is a tech touch model by the CSM. So this is something like you send them digital content, you send them self-serve resources, and you don't spend too much hands-on time there. And the business, the CS org has decided that if they fall into this low bucket, this is the engagement that we want to offer this customer base. On the contrary, it frees up the CS time to engage with a different bucket of customers a little bit more. So if we look at the opposite end of the spectrum, the top right quadrant, which is high current spend and also high potential, we want to make sure that we're investing our resources and our time there as much as possible. So in this case, this is a world where this organization has an account manager and a customer success manager, and the recommended engagement here is they're both high touch partners in supporting this customer. So things like expanding the business from a revenue perspective and continuing to drive adoption from the customer success perspective. So this is another model where you can think about the matrices that are important for your business and then creating kind of recommended playbooks or engagement models around the buckets that come out of the matrix.
So after segmenting your customers, what comes next? So we've talked about some examples of segmentation and some ways to iterate and make that more accurate over time. And so once you've segmented your customers into like-minded cohorts and you know what type of service you're going to deliver them, the next step is to map out what's the ideal journey look like for them. And when we think of this customer journey, here's a sample of one you may have seen similar to in the past. We like to, at this group, something we all had in common was start our journey with pre-boarding. And as Monica mentioned earlier, this could look different for different types of customers, but really is an overlay to the sales function in terms of how do we make sure that we are aligning with a potential or prospective customer before they come on board to have joint expectations, goals, timelines to ensure that we are creating the right partnership. Now, this can look very different depending on the type of customer. So what this could mean in pre-boarding for a tech touch customer could purely be a set of questions, a form online, where you're asking them about their goals, their outcomes, what they're looking to achieve by when. And based on that, it may trigger a series of personalized, automated, or digital-led emails. Whereas a larger customer, maybe an enterprise or a high-touch customer, you may be getting on the phone with them and you may have a customer success manager or even sometimes a customer success leader get on the phone and map out a timeline. You may come up with a project plan, agreed upon dates, deliverables, some cases even an SOW with specific things that may happen. And you agree upon that to know that you're entering into this partnership to be set up for the long haul and be mutually set up for success. And we like to think of that as we go throughout the journey. So at every stage, each task is based off of what is the most efficient way to deliver this to your customer. And that's really where the whole term and philosophy of scale comes in. It doesn't mean that there isn't overlap, and it doesn't mean that you can't make exceptions from time to time. But a common example could be something like a kickoff call. A kickoff call for some customers may actually just be a kickoff email. And for other customers, this may be a live in person, back in the day was more common, or a Zoom or online type meeting. And then as customers are going throughout the journey, you want to monitor their success. So you may look at product feedback, and you may determine between the onboarding and adoption phase that there's two critical things. In this example, maybe they haven't created pages within your product, or they haven't invited other users. And you've determined that that adoption is critical and that usage of the product to get them to the next stage of adoption and retention. And so what you've determined is, based off of the certain type of customer, there are touch points that are coming out of a system. They're coming out to be emails. One email may come where you can reply to a support team only and not a direct human, whereas another one may come where you are replying and you're getting a CSM and you're getting some subject matter expertise. Or others, you may be calling the customer live or sending them a link to schedule time with you. And so the real goal here is that you're delivering what we think makes the customer have the highest likelihood for seeing value in your product and meeting their desired outcomes, but you're doing it in different ways, and you're doing it based off of what's most effective to deliver at your company and for them. As that being said, when we think of this, we don't think of the customer journey as the end all be all. You renew, you grow. We know those are great milestones, but we also think this ends with advocacy. And it's obviously a constant loop, and sometimes there's additional features or products and you're going back to maybe an onboarding or adoption phase. But advocacy is so critical here, because we like to think of, yes, a customer can renew or grow, but are they advocates of your product? Are they talking about your business? When we think of advocacy, what we'd like to think of is, overall, not only would this person recommend you, but we've all had great experiences in our life where no one asked us to be a reference. No one asked us to talk to another customer. We just felt that from within. So we knew that we wanted to post on LinkedIn, or we wanted to write a Yelp review. And no one prompted us or promised us a gift card or anything of that nature. We just felt so strongly about the service and the product and the partnership that we did that. Usually when you say that, most people think of an example that comes to mind. I always think of retail examples, which tend to be very specific to my buyer needs. But when you think of how do we create those advocates, it really does start from the pre-boarding and setting those expectations, aligning throughout, delivering the right content and service through the right method at the right time, and creating those natural advocates to continue the process of growth throughout your company and theirs. That being said, I'll go to Monica to talk more about how do we do this without just a customer success management team.
Thanks, Celia. We've covered a lot today. We've covered how to think about the customer journey, how to think about within that journey, what are the segments that exist in terms of the behaviors that we want to drive. We also thought about within that journey, what are the various levels of maturity. And so once we've come up with a really good way to bucket and group our customers by, like you mentioned, similar-minded cohorts, we have then decided what the ideal program looks like and what those touch points look like. So thanks for touching on that, Celia. One thing you mentioned was that those touch points can be delivered through different methods. They can be delivered through a live call. They can be delivered through a pre-recorded virtual CSM. They can be delivered through a resource or a document. And so I really want to emphasize that customer success is going through an evolution where we don't just think about the enablement and the education as driven by one single human, but we really think about the ecosystem of resources that are helping our customers move along this maturity journey and this customer journey throughout their entire life cycle. So alongside your CSM, I recommend investing in these areas just as much, triangulating all of the ways in which your customers can get support. Things like investing in CS operations, we couldn't do anything without them. Things like investing in one-to-many webcasts, just like this one, or on-demand webinars that your customers can access at different times. of course, your support and help center. That is oftentimes a first stop resource for a CSM. Any sort of self-guided resources, courses or certifications that you can begin to offer about your platform. And the list goes on and on. A big one at Notion is community. We love investing in community, and we actually put our users in touch with one another because we figured out that they are actually each other's most helpful advisor, even beyond the CSM. So just emphasizing here that we're seeing customer success as a much large scale framework that is built around enablement and driving towards outcomes, not just based off of a single human or a single team.
Thanks so much, Monica. I love that. And, we all say customer success is a team sport, but really it's not just one team. So it's really critical to make sure that you're investing at the right point in time in the right resources to scale efficiently. We'd love to leave you with some takeaways today. Hopefully you found helpful talking about the maturity, the segmentation, and the next steps. What we say as our 3 top takeaways are: 1, make sure that you start simple. Understand what you're solving for. Understand the customer goals. Use the early pre-boarding stages to align with them, and understand how you're going to accomplish them together. 2nd, segment, but segment with action in mind. Don't segment just for the sake of it. Segment based off of the desired outcome, how we're going to deliver it. So the method, it could be digital, it could be live, etc., and at what frequency. When you do it with real action in mind, it's much easier to implement, measure, and iterate. Finally, focus on automation. Once you've learned what your customers are looking for and how you can jointly deliver that, leverage digital approaches. This could be everything from, we've talked about automated emails, but this can actually go further to some of the resources we're referring to earlier: self-education, guided resources, one-to-one personalized digital interactions. Okay, or finally, automate and leverage digital approaches. Looking for those one-to-one personalized digital interactions. When I say one-to-one, we've typically thought of an actual person-to-person. There's so much technology nowadays. We use it in our personal lives. Why not leverage it in the customer success industry? Focus on platforms that allow you to deliver what feels like a personalized experience, but is really one-to-many and is on a digital-led level. One example is Cast, which allows you to deliver a one-to-many personalized experience. So it actually feels like it's one CSM working with you as your customer, but it's done on a more scalable and efficient way. So we leave you with these takeaways and hopes you'll be able to implement some of these on your own and start to scale and see the success that it delivers.
Thank you so much, Celia and Monica. That was exciting and so informative. I did ask over LinkedIn and over email to send me some questions. So if you received a whole bunch of questions, I feel we have covered quite a few of them. But I'm going to still ask a few questions, and some of them are like very specific to how you are doing it at Notion or at Wisq. So anyone can take this. So I think you've covered this first question. The question is there a right time or stage in your business to start consider scaling?
I'm happy to take this one. Just having been at Notion, which has been in hypergrowth mode for the last 2 years, what I've seen as a CS leader is just like we want to take our customers through a maturity model, our own organizations and departments go through a maturity model. And so what I've seen is typically when you're early stage at a company trying to find product market fit, you probably hire your first CSM or your first CSM lead, and their role is really listen to all of the customers we have, do whatever it takes, spend time with them, document those learnings, because you're still early days and you have your first initial customers. As this evolves, you reach product market fit, you have more and more customers signing up, you might hire 2 or 3 more CSMs, but eventually you get to a point where you have enough of a customer base where you realize that you can see trends happening. And so typically once you see those major trends or those major kind of aha moments or success moments, then you can kind of start standardizing that experience. And so your CSMs are able to follow more or less of a playbook and help those customers along that journey. And then as you get more and more customers, then you kind of hit the mark that we talked about in this presentation, where now you realize not all customers are created equal. There are probably a few segments here, a few buckets here, and then you identify those buckets and then change up your engagement model depending on those buckets. At this point, you might start investing in tooling. You might realize that your CSM's time is not being invested in the most proportional ways. So you say, okay, we want to automate more and spend more actual human hours here and spend our human hours elsewhere. And you begin to build up that intuition as you see what these buckets of customers look like and how they perform over time. So we all go through that maturity internally. And I would say, like, when you start seeing trends and you start realizing that your CSMs have certain elements that are quite repetitive and not necessarily the best way to spend their time, then you can think about, how do we scale this out?
Thank you. So another question is, how do you transition a low ARR customer who's used to high touch model to a low or tech touch model?
I'm happy to start this one off. This is such a great one because you see it so often. As Monica mentioned, especially in the early days of product market fit and establishing yourselves, a lot of customers are treated as very high touch. You may have CEOs or executive sponsors on calls with even your smallest customers because it's all about the learnings, creating that advocacy for your continued growth. And you eventually get to a point where you have enough customers, you have that product market fit, and although you appreciate so much those early customers, it just doesn't scale to treat them all the same way. And so I believe in setting expectations, but also making sure that someone is not losing something. What I mean by that is, what's in it for the customer? If the customer used to email your first CSM or one of your top CSMs for every single question, likely now that person has a larger book of business and the answers are going to be delayed. And they may be posted in a community or in a self-serve wiki. They may be answered better by a support team. So I like to reposition to the customer why it's of their benefit that they're actually getting more resources at their own time versus potentially depending on one or a few people for their questions. And that's typically helped in, we really don't want to change the experience they're getting. We're just giving them more resources, which in turn is putting them at a different level of our segmentation because they're not directly talking to a one-to-one person anymore. I don't know if either of you have anything else to add on that.
I was going to actually add, and I totally agreed. You have so many resources. One thing you could do is like bring the right resource at the right time. And you could do that digitally as well, right? You can curate like what resources are important depending on where they are in their journey, how mature they are, and what segment they belong to. So the next question, I think you have covered very broadly, but I think they're asking in particular, what involvement do you and your CS teams have in pre-boarding or pre-sales?
I'm happy to take this one, Celia. Oh, I see you jumping in.
Yeah, I'm happy to kick it off, and maybe you can add in as well. But I've been a huge fan of pre-boarding, and so I mentioned a little bit, but to dive deeper in specifics, I believe for any customer over a certain spend threshold that we've determined to be our high touch or potentially enterprise customer, that there is someone live joining a call with sales and the customer. There's a set script. We're talking about timelines. We're setting expectations. We're aligning on what's to come. So I strongly believe in that and have done that to date. For smaller customers, sometimes it may be okay to join or have a CSM join, but otherwise I feel like having a very strong slide deck or a strong community and wikis of information allows a customer to see exactly what to expect and when, even sharing a journey. What we'll be delivering and how, and what do we expect from them and what do they expect from us? That can also be done through documentation for a lower or tech touch customer. I'd love to hear how Notion has done this.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. We typically like to be a little bit protective of the CS time pre-sales, but if there's good signals, it's at the end of the deal or it's strategic customer for whatever reason, we have found that bringing in the CSM actually accelerates the deal closure time, and it instills kind of peace of mind for the customer that they are in fact going to get this level of support that they're buying into. I found that a lot of times, sometimes the CS offering at other companies is more lip service than anything, and they might never even hear from their CSM. And so treating that as a differentiator and introducing them and saying, look, they're real, here they are, they actually understand your needs and your use case and they're ready to get started with you, actually makes a huge difference in starting off that customer relationship on the right foot.
That's interesting. Yes. Another question. What team adjustments do you have to make as you focus more and more on automation?
Ooh, I can start on this one. It's my favorite topic. So I think this is particularly relevant for PLG companies, but as we're seeing the rise of scaling CS, digital first models, the CSM profile is looking quite different than it maybe did a decade ago. Back in the day, you would have a super high touch, like enterprisey CSM who would go on site and host a QBR. And we've really evolved to be able to scale out our efforts, cover a lot more customers at once, do a lot more high volume work. So I'm actually looking for CSMs that maybe have prior experience as an SDR or even a background in sort of like marketing automation, because we found that the majority of the value that the CSM is bringing is those aha moments, is that product enablement and education. So how can you deliver that education at scale, but still make it feel tailored to the customer's point in time? And so I found folks that are good with kind of large scale tooling, one-to-many mindsets, the ability to build something that doesn't just work for that one customer that one time, but they can think of like, how will this work for 100 customers that look the same? That's kind of the skill set we're looking for today.
Yeah, and I'll also add on that, not only do I love that it opens up the industry to so many more types of backgrounds and people and allows them to learn and grow, I love the career pathing that it creates internally. So it allows for people to move in all sorts of different roles. And as you continue to segment your customers and as you continue to deliver in different ways, there may be paths that didn't exist before that allow to retain your employees. It used to traditionally be you moved up into a high level CSM and then a manager, and there weren't many other options. Even from the slide earlier, there's so many new options that allows people to move into different functions and stay with your company longer, which is always a great asset.
Thank you. So there are like three questions that are very similar. So I'm going to just put one question and just mention what the others asked. So how do you measure the success of scaled or programmatic initiatives? And the other was like, what metrics do you work on and what do you report? So very similar. How do you measure the success of scaled and programmatic initiatives?
Yeah, I'm happy to kick that one off. So, it's very important to first identify what are you measuring overall for your customers. You hear a lot about, net revenue retention, but that's typically coming after. So how are you measuring early on, starting from that pre-boarding stage throughout the adoption, throughout the advocacy, to know what's going to make a customer successful, to know how you're going to get to that retention and growth. So if you have that baseline overall, things like product usage, number of features adopted, number of new users invited. It could be whether they're referenceable or they're being advocates. It could be, how many sponsors on their side, how engaged are they in joining calls? And so once you have those metrics, I like to use the same exact metrics for different programs. So I like to, as I'm segmenting my customers and trying something new, I'm trying, instead of a call, an automated email or a one-to-one digital approach. Look at the success metric, look at what it was before, and look at what it is going forward. And you obviously need enough data for it to be meaningful, and it does take some time. It's not just based off of one or two customers in changing the model, but I really do like to compare the same success metrics regardless of the delivery type.
Couldn't agree more. Our success metrics don't look too different, whether it's a high touch model or a low touch model, because the hypothesis is that whether they're high touch or low touch, we've decided that that's the right size of engagement for that customer, which is going to give us the same outcomes either way. So they're not too different. At Notion, we use the DEAR framework or DREAM framework, some companies call it. And so we have a couple of measures of success. D, so we do deployment, relationship, engagement, adoption, and maturity. So we use Dream, and that really helps us break down the customer journey, as we mentioned. So a customer might be really high on deployment, and that phase was completed successfully, but maybe they're low on adoption or maturity. So it helps us figure out where we should be investing our time. And then once we know that, we can deliver that either through a digital method or through a human touch method.
Awesome. We have two more questions. Do you guys have time?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. The first one is, how do you determine what stage of the customer maturity model a buyer or user is on? Anyone want to take that?
A buyer or user?
Yeah.
I think this is one that is custom to your product complexity, and what you're trying to drive. Um, and so you actually have to come up with those definitions yourself. If your product is highly complex, it has a lot of use cases, then maybe, a customer who's still in their level 1 infancy looks very different from a customer who's on a level 3 maturity, let's say. An example for Notion is, if you're using our basic features, so just basic note taking and documentation, then that is less kind of maturity points than using a higher, more advanced use case like databases or project and task management. So that's how we've defined it for our product. And so we have more or less of an idea of what it looks like to adopt more sophisticated use cases over time, and we correlate that with how mature the customer is or is not.
Yeah, because we at CAS still use Notion as a CRM, just so that you know. So
Yeah, that's pretty advanced.
yeah. Okay, so the last question. So how do you create and measure customer advocacy and referrals?
Yeah, I think this is a great one. Happy to start here. So when we think of customer advocacy and referrals, I like to think of this as a manual and a natural process. So if in an ideal world, you've done all of the things you said you would have done in your shared expectations by when you said you've done them, and you've exceeded the customer's expectations, you'd like to think that you created a natural advocate. And I feel like that's the most probable way to get a customer to feel like they are an advocate of your company. There are ways where you can encourage people at different stages or your CSMs to ask, are you willing to be a reference? And customers, may say yes, or they may say no for various reasons. And that's a good time to reset and say, what would it take to be a reference? So it's really asking them. But I like to think of a reference as a customer that's willing to talk to others about you if you ask them. An advocate is someone who, on their own goodwill, is just so impressed by the service and the product that they are telling other people in their free time, waiting in line somewhere, about what they've heard. And I'm an advocate of many products out there, and there's no one that's going to ask me to be an advocate. It's just naturally going to come out of me. And that's what I strive to deliver throughout the whole journey.
Nice. Yeah. And
I
then
assume Peloton is one of them.
Peloton is one of them.
Which Peloton do you have? The bike or the treadmill or the bike plus?
The Peloton bike. I'm a huge advocate. All of my Instagram groups are about them. I'm part of the community. I share with others. I talk about it in my intro. No one's ever asked me to do that. It's just something I believe in.
But you would say your NPS is out of 10.
Yes.
Last time I checked, they were coming up with a row machine, right?
Yeah,
Like,
the rowing
They
machine.
are.
yeah, I have to buy that because I
Yeah.
have room for that. Because I had a daybed over here, which I just moved. So
Oh,
I
nice.
put
Yeah.
that instead.
Needs to be replaced by a rowing machine.
There you go. Any parting advice for most of our audience is actually like CS leaders who not necessarily are just managing the CSMs, but they're also managing upsells, cross sells, advocacy. They're managing driving usage, adoption, retention, renewals, right? So those are the kind of folks who listen to CAS presentations. Any parting advice?
Yeah, I can start. I think we're in a particularly interesting time right now, given the macroeconomy, and CS leaders were being told to do more with less. And there's pros and cons of that, but I think we can do kind of the same with less, in the sense of getting smarter about where the time is going. And so, although scaling might seem like becoming leaner or more efficient, it's actually a really strategic initiative that's going to help you get to the next level over time. So, as a CS leader, we're actually spending a lot of our time thinking about how to scale things and how to build it for the future. And I think we're going to thank ourselves later, but this is a very, very kind of strategic initiative that you can ladder up to leadership and say, hey, like we actually made it so that we've right sized all of our engagements and we're still seeing stellar outcomes from the team.
Wonderful. Celia?
I couldn't agree more. Measure, iterate, start simple. And again, don't think of this as just, Monica said it really well, but don't think of this as not needing as many people or not needing as many resources. Think of it as delivering a great experience that leads to an advocate in a more efficient and better way. And it's not necessarily always about less resources. It's about what the customer needs and what's most convenient for them. So start simple, measure often, and continue to iterate and look at other ways in the future to deliver to customers.
Thank you so much, both of you. This concludes this webcast. We will send it out to you shortly. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Thank you.